Hello. We were just discussing fawning, so I'm going to share my notes with you. So it's a trauma response, caretaking and people pleasing through the lens of complex trauma. Trauma responses are not a choice. They are the body's instinctual motion to danger. Fawning is an unconscious attempt to keep us safe and maintain connection in an unsafe environment or relationship. So fawning can become habitual, habitated, appearing like personality even without even knowing its origins or originates, I would say, as a traumatic response to a threat even. So I never saw myself as a people pleaser, certainly not at my own expense. The phrase alone inspired shame and judgment, echoing things like I have heard throughout my life. Don't be a doormat. Why don't you just put yourself first? Compulsive caretaking seemed like a choice and an obvious one not to make. But fast forward decades into adulthood, as I was putting the pieces of my childhood trauma together with all the ways it had impacted me, I came across the term fawning. It was originally coined by, his name's Pete Walker. He's a psychotherapist, and he specializes in complex trauma, synonymous with like developmental or relational, even childhood trauma. So anyway, Walker saw fawning as the fourth F, of trauma responses. I'm sure you're aware of, fight, flight, freeze, and he added fawn. It was particularly common for people who had or were experiencing long-term relational trauma. He even partnered with her name's Ingrid Clayton, I believe, who has a PhD, and she specializes with the intersection of, spirituality, addiction, and trauma. And they put together a book about healing, from narcissistic abuse and complex trauma. As most know, I am putting out a book of personal experience, much like she did. The upside of writing and even researching your issues is you learn more. You heal as much as you can, and then you help others. So to better understand fawning, so far I would describe it as a response to a threat by becoming more appealing to the threat. A mirroring or merging with others and their desires or expectations even, in order to diffuse conflict and find safety. We surrender our boundaries, it seems, and lack of assertiveness when we are fawning. We are accommodating, appeasing, submitting to the very person or people who have harmed us versus, while fawning is meant to neutralize danger, it also causes us to abandon our own needs, thereby reinforcing our wounds even. So learning about this trauma response, I felt seen for perhaps the first time in my life. I made sense to myself in a way that didn't inspire shame. I realized it helped me understand my state of mind and, in childhood, and I reflexively responded, like all trauma responses, fawning wasn't a choice. It was survival. But it also pointed to something I'd never divulged into, not as a client, or multiple even sessions I had, on therapy couches, or, with my career, over the years. So maybe a psychology understanding, begin to recall ways one can play into their abuser's hands, like trying to stay in their good graces, to make their happy moods last a little bit longer. How these became chronic, like autopilot responses, even, particularly with men in positions of authority, for years to come. As a teenager, living with a string of narcissistic, stepfathers, my mother would call them, I remember feeling like I was emotionally prostituting myself. They would swing from like icing me out with the silent treatment, and then steep into punishments to giving me, lavish gifts and attention. So, as though it was like a switch that had to be flipped, I went from being furious to fawning, saying what I knew he wanted to hear, expressing my gratitude for his generosity while, swallowing my rage. I felt like two different people, really. The real me and the one I had to become in order to endure my circumstances. So, and I hated myself for it, I realize now. So, and to think I was only, we're talking 9 years old when this began. And of course, it's even more disturbing, to be that age too when it's going on. I didn't experience my value or worth in safe and nurturing environments. So my body learned to fawn, trying to keep other people happy or in some type of appreciation of me, in order to prove myself worthy or valuable. I repeated this pattern to such a degree that by the time I learned about, fawning, I had decades of unconscious behaviors to unpack. All the ways I'd privileged other people, tolerating their abusive behavior, while propping people up even while they were doing it. I believe my career as a crisis counselor for children was particularly built on this foundation, thinking, my value could only be found in my helpfulness or caretaking. I kept finding myself trying to save all these kids. These cases, the stories would stay with me. And I couldn't sleep. They tell you to, don't take, your work home, so to speak, but I couldn't do that. It gets to be too much. And I have to take breaks, or I had to then for sure, to check in and balance myself. It was this whole save the planet. I'm thinking about all these, kids that need help. But all these, it turns out, were core wounds, that became vivid enough to, realize they were there. And so I began to, write a book, and I wanted to share my experiences with others. So having been sexualized, by my stepfathers at an early age, my sexuality became intrinsically tied even to fawning, as a way of morphing into someone's perceived desire. Then talking to so many teenage girls, at work, and recognizing their stories and their feelings, I can't tell you how many times my heart broke as I tried to get them to want to fight for themselves, and not just, survive, but to thrive too. Fawning looks like flirting. When I wasn't attracted or interested in a person, playing into their fantasy, while hoping to get them, at bay. So this led to countless boundary crossing situations by older men that were in some type of relationship, usually with my mother, inappropriate men for sure. I was always shocked when they eventually crossed a line, never understanding, the how or why I was being pursued this way again, or how I was reenacting my childhood trauma, even as an adult. We've long been aware of the pushback survivors who receive when they have frozen in the face of danger. Why didn't you just leave or run or tell, someone might say. And these are common questions aimed at, blaming and shaming victims of abuse. With fawning, the shaming can feel worse because it often appears that we have some agency in the situation. And in some sense, we did. Usually polyvagal, theory, I think Stephen Porges is his name, came up with that. It's a model of the atomic nervous system. I appreciate even Jane Elizabeth. She has an interpretation that a fight or flight response is like she said something along the lines of putting your foot on the gas pedal. It's what creates movement, so it makes sense, and momentum even. But when I think of, to fight or flee when we're in danger, freeze would be like putting your foot on the brake, disconnecting or disassociating from an unsafe, event, and our body. Fawning can be seen as putting one foot on the gas pedal and one foot, the other one on the brake, at the same time even. So we have just enough social engagement to appear or appease, while disconnecting from our true selves. Although it appears like we are agreeable, it's important to understand that this is a mask for the terror that lies beneath. And true self-expression is trapped for only, the allowed, in small doses that didn't rock the boat. Finding safety in a, predatory relationship is always the priority. Trumping self-esteem, though, many times, self-care, honoring ourselves as separate beings in any way. So the fawn response involves people-pleasing to the degree that an individual disconnects from their own emotions, sensations and needs. In childhood, this occurs because they must withhold expressing their authentic emotions of sadness, fear, and anger in order to avoid potential wrath or cruelty from a parent or a caregiver. As a result, they turn their negative feelings toward themselves in the form of self-criticism, self-loathing, or even, self-harming behaviors. In adulthood, an unresolved fawn response can then become the root of codependence, depression, addiction, somatic symptoms of pain and illnesses, because fawners experience a modicum of safety while being exploited. basically. So their nervous system becomes accustomed to not only tolerating chaos and exploitation, but feeling a sense of control within them. This dynamic is the foundation for both trauma reenactment and, trauma bonding, which is why I found myself in so many dysfunctional relationships over the years. The more I've understand and discussed, my experiences of fawning, the more I'm hearing from countless people who had, a similar story to tell. We are finding our voices after a lifetime of shame. We are removing blame from ourselves and placing it where it belongs. In understanding how we're traumatized, doing exactly what we needed in order to survive, we are finally finding a truer sense of safety that doesn't compromise any part of who we are, right? The big blessing here, seeing the shift, I realized that my person is not in the same category with all those men. He is in one by himself. I finally, met someone where it was authentic, at least, of course, the double-sided of desire and, love. And, I realized that probably, it did a number on me. If you haven't worked on the healing yet, you may at first be scared and not see it. And then, if the other person hasn't worked on themselves, then they're not going to see it either. So it's kind of like the moment when you take a time out. Sometimes it is benefits if, you take a break and you work on self, and then you're a better self for a better relationship, right? So I'm going to leave you with the top, let's say, 8 things to look out for that you may have been or currently experience the fawning trauma response. So number 1 is you don't express, or know your needs or wants. What do you want for dinner? And, you may not know, or maybe not as willing to say because you're worried the other person, doesn't want that too. Or number 2, you don't ever really say how you feel. You keep a lot of things bottled up. Number 3, you struggle to directly say no, to a person or a thing or, an activity or event, something you don't want to do, or someone you don't want to be around. Number 4, more focused on others, even protecting others more than yourself. Number 5, you don't set or hold boundaries. Number 6, you're a fixer. You make it your job to lift others, to help others feel good and better if they're, down. Or if they have a problem, you got to come up with a solution. Number 8, chronic mental health or physical illnesses. Fawning, at one point, made me feel safer, but also thoroughly destroyed me. I feel like I could then never truly live my life the way I need to, because I must prioritize everyone else and only exist, through other people. So, I appreciate that you guys listened to me having the courage to share this, and I only have the intention to hope that it helped someone else. So have a great day, guys. Talk to you soon, okay? Bye.